The guidelines for our project was to find an ordinary household item that is generally under $15 and identify how all the parts function together in addition to coming up with how to make improvements upon the original design. We ultimately chose to go with the table fan. When we think of household items that could use improvements, the ordinary table fan comes to mind as something that fixes an issue but comes with many others. The biggest concern we wanted to address were the noise output levels, the potential disruption for papers to fly away while working, as well as to make the fan most comfortable at one setting as opposed to erratic switching through multiple settings. And in order to achieve these goals, we have to consider the design and aerodynamics of the fan. Since our project was primarily a market analysis, we conducted a survey to see which improvements would be most desirable for consumers at a reasonable cost. From our results, we determined the most anticipated design improvement would be for air circulation. The next best improvement would be for noise levels, being that the fan would most likely be in close proximity to the consumer. While conducting the market analysis for producing the best conceivable cost, it was discovered that 57% of people were not willing to pay more than $20 for our product, which is why we priced the fan at $18.
With pricing in a reasonable range, we switch focus to the second most important aspect of the fan, airflow. So when considering the airflow, we ask two main questions. Does it adequately cool you, and does it create minimal disturbance, meaning papers aren't going to be flying everywhere? According to ASHRAE, an airspeed of 0.8 meters per second is when things start to get too drafty, a threshold which both fan speeds unfortunately cross. So what can we do? Well, we can't answer that question directly. We first have to examine how airspeed relates to temperature. Unfortunately, there's no straightforward equation relating the two. This is largely because fans don't actually change the temperature of the room, they just push the air around. The reason you feel cool is because the fast-moving air speeds up heat loss from your body. Now on to the data. Another graph provided by ASHRAE shows that increasing the velocity can only cool you down by so much. In their paper, they state a max 5.4 degrees cooling, but we can assume around 8 degrees in optimal condition. So what does this mean for us? Well, according to thermostat data, the average indoor temperature that people prefer is around 75 degrees, with a little wiggle room. Rounded, this gives us about a 10-degree temperature increase above comfort levels for the fan to be effective, or up to 85 degrees. We like to push that range up into the 90s or beyond, but as it turns out, fans stop cooling you entirely once you reach around 95 degrees, since your internal body temperature is no longer warmer than the air. This is true at least in relatively dry conditions. As you approach closer to this limit, the effects of cooling become less and less prominent, so even the most powerful fan might only cool you down a degree or so in 90-degree weather. That is all to say that our fan won't be cooling well at 85 to 90 degrees. Unfortunately, there's not much we can do design-wise that will fix both the draft and temperature problem. Anything that increases the airspeed increases the draft, and anything that decreases the airspeed decreases the effective cooling. We can try and make the fan larger so that it moves more air at lower speeds, but by the time we've increased the blades to make a noticeable difference, it's not the size of a desktop fan anymore, and you'd be better off buying a stand fan. That being said, the fan is still decent for indoor cooling, especially considering that most indoor spaces will have some sort of air conditioning in place. So this fan is ideal for supplemental cooling in hot weather with no modifications. Since we can't make many changes to airflow, we turn to the third most important feature, noise. As we can see, the sound has a pretty large range from 55 to 70 decibels, which goes from a moderate rainfall to someone vacuuming. This is far from ideal. In fact, when we surveyed people, 62% of them said that the maximum noise level they tolerate would be from 50 to 60 decibels or less, with an additional 10% of them barely standing the 60 to 75 decibel limit. So our fan could definitely use some modifications. So there are several types of noises that our fan makes, but a lot of them are due to the rotor, which is not our area of focus. Instead, we turn to noises that we can impact directly with design. First up is tip clearance noise. So this occurs as you might expect at the tip of the blade, specifically where there's a casing around it. The clearance refers to the gap between the two. When the air flows around the tip, vortices and turbulence can form in the gap, causing noise. A proposed solution to this is attaching a ring shroud that more tightly fits the radius of the blades. This would greatly reduce the gap and provide less room for noise to occur. Another type of noise is trailing edge noise, which is somewhat similar to tip clearance noise in that air is flowing over the blade and creating vortices at the end. One design that has shown positive results in minimizing this noise is a serrated trailing edge. This edge seeks to break up the vortices as the air rushes around, leading to less turbulence downstream. Here's a rough sketch of the proposed design change. While not particularly appealing, you're not really going to see the blades. They're behind a protective case, and when the fan is on, it's all just a blur. So aside from manufacturing, implementing this design shouldn't be overly challenging.
Our goal was to eliminate as many problems as possible that are usually associated with fans. For what it's worth, our fan design addresses possibly the most overlooked issue, loud noise, and at a low cost. And while we prepare for the Georgia summer heat, we won't even have to yell while trying to stay cool.